What happens when a methodical, brilliant Congresswoman armed with damning evidence faces off against one of America's most controversial political figures? Can documented proof of intentional family separation policies destroy a political career in real time? And why did Stephen Miller's dismissive chuckle become the moment that ended his political future forever? Today, we're diving deep into the congressional hearing that political insiders are calling the most devastating political takedown in modern American history. This wasn't just another heated political exchange. This was a masterclass in preparation, precision, and the power of truth over arrogance. Representative Jasmine Crockett didn't just question Stephen Miller. She systematically dismantled his defenses using his own words, his own emails, and his own documented policies. What started as Miller's confident appearance before Congress ended with his political reputation in ruins and Crockett emerging as a national political superstar. But here's what makes this confrontation even more significant. It wasn't about partisan politics or gotcha moments. It was about documented evidence, internal emails, and the devastating power of preparation facing off against arrogance and dismissiveness. By the end of this analysis, you'll understand not just what happened in that hearing room, but why it represents a fundamental shift in how political accountability works in America. By the end of this analysis, you'll understand not just what happened in that hearing room, but why it represents a fundamental shift in how political accountability works in America. This is the story of how one Congresswoman's methodical approach to justice transformed her into a national figure while ending the career of one of the most influential policy architects in recent American history. To understand the magnitude of what happened during this confrontation, you need to understand who Jasmine Crockett is and why her background made her the perfect person to take on Stephen Miller's policy legacy. Representative Jasmine Crockett represents Texas's 30th Congressional District and brings a unique combination of legal expertise and political savvy to her role in Congress before entering politics. Crockett was a civil rights attorney who specialized in cases involving government, accountability, and constitutional violations. This background would prove crucial in her systematic demolition of Miller's defenses. What makes Crockett particularly formidable is her methodical approach to building cases. Unlike many politicians who rely on sound bites and political theater, Crockett approaches congressional hearings like a courtroom attorney building a case for a jury. She doesn't rely on emotion or grandstanding. She relies on documents, evidence, and the devastating power of facts. Her legal background taught her that the most effective way to destroy an opponent's credibility isn't through personal attacks or heated exchanges. It's through patient, methodical presentation of evidence that makes denial impossible. This approach would prove devastating when applied to Stephen Miller's policy record. Crockett also understood something that many politicians miss. In the age of social media and viral moments, a well-documented takedown can reach far beyond the hearing room. She wasn't just questioning Miller for the benefit of her congressional colleagues. She was building a case that would resonate with the American people who had been affected by his policies. Her preparation for this hearing was legendary even by congressional standards. Sources suggest she spent weeks reviewing internal documents, studying policy implementations, and preparing specific questions designed to corner Miller with his own words. This wasn't going to be a typical political hearing where both sides score points. This was going to be a systematic dismantling of Miller's entire policy legacy. Stephen Miller came to this congressional hearing as one of the most influential and controversial policy architects in recent American political history. His role in designing and implementing family separation policies at the border had made him a lightning rod for criticism, but also a hero to those who supported aggressive immigration enforcement. Miller's approach to immigration policy was characterized by what he called deterrence through enforcement, the idea that harsh consequences for illegal border crossings would discourage future attempts. The family separation policy was presented to the public as an unfortunate but necessary consequence of enforcing immigration law, but internal documents would later reveal a much more calculated approach. What made Miller particularly confident going into this hearing was his track record of surviving previous congressional confrontations. He had appeared before hostile committees before and had generally managed to deflect criticism through a combination of legal technicalities, policy justifications, and political rhetoric. His confidence was evident from the moment he entered the hearing room. But Miller had never faced someone like Jasmine Crockett. Previous congressional questioners had often focused on the emotional impact of family separation or the political implications of the policies. They had asked broad questions that allowed Miller to hide behind legal interpretations and policy complexities. Crockett was going to take a completely different approach. Miller's dismissive attitude was apparent from the beginning of the hearing. He treated the questioning as a political exercise that he could navigate through careful word choice and legal technicalities. His body language suggested he viewed this as just another opportunity to defend policies he was proud of implementing. When Representative Crockett began her questioning, it was immediately clear that this would be different from typical congressional hearings. Instead of starting with broad policy questions or emotional appeals, she opened with specific documentation and precise questions designed to establish a factual foundation that would be impossible for Miller to dispute. Crockett's first questions focused on establishing Miller's role in policy development and his access to information about policy consequences. She didn't ask whether he supported family separation. She asked about specific meetings, specific documents, and specific decisions that could be verified through official records. This approach immediately put Miller on the defensive in a way he wasn't expecting. Instead of being able to give broad policy justifications, he was forced to answer specific questions about his personal involvement in policy decisions. Crockett's legal background was evident in her questioning style. She was building a case step by step, establishing facts that would support her ultimate conclusions. Miller's initial responses showed his confidence remained intact. He answered her early questions with the same combination of legal technicalities and policy justifications that had served him well in previous hearings. But observers noted that he seemed slightly uncomfortable with the specificity of her questions and the documents she was referencing. What Miller didn't realize was that Crockett wasn't just asking random questions. She was following a carefully planned sequence designed to corner him with his own documented statements. Each question built on the previous one, creating a logical chain that would ultimately lead to devastating conclusions about his intentions and motivations. The methodical nature of Crockett's approach was particularly effective because it denied Miller the opportunity to use his typical deflection tactics. He couldn't dismiss her questions as political theater because they were based on specific documents. He couldn't claim she was misunderstanding policy complexities because she was quoting his own words back to him. By the midpoint of her questioning period, it was clear that something unprecedented was happening. Miller's confidence was beginning to waver as he realized that Crockett had access to information and documentation that he hadn't expected to be confronted with in a public hearing. The turning point in this confrontation came when Representative Crockett began pressing Miller specifically about the human cost of family separation policies. As she described documented cases of children separated from their parents, Miller made what would become the defining mistake of his political career. He chuckled dismissively. This moment, captured on video and immediately broadcast across social media platforms, revealed everything the American people needed to know about Miller's attitude toward the policies he had implemented. It wasn't just a political disagreement or a policy debate. It was a human being showing callous indifference to documented human suffering. The chuckle was particularly damaging because it came in response to Crockett's description of specific cases involving young children who had been separated from their parents for extended periods. These weren't abstract policy discussions. These were real families whose lives had been devastated by policies Miller had designed and implemented. What made this moment even more devastating was the contrast it created with Crockett's professional, methodical approach. While she was presenting documented evidence of human suffering with the seriousness it deserved, Miller was treating it as a subject for amusement. The visual contrast was stark and politically devastating. Social media immediately seized on the chuckle, with clips going viral across multiple platforms. The image of Miller laughing while Crockett described separated families became a symbol of everything critics had argued about his approach to immigration policy, that it treated human beings as political pawns rather than as people, deserving of basic dignity. But the chuckle was more than just a public relations disaster. It was a strategic mistake that played directly into Crockett's hands. By showing dismissiveness toward documented human suffering, Miller had undermined his own credibility and made it easier for Crockett to present him as someone who viewed family separation as an acceptable political tool. The moment also revealed something important about Miller's character and his approach to policy implementation. The chuckle suggested that he not only implemented these policies but took satisfaction in their harshest consequences. This would become crucial as Crockett moved toward her most devastating revelations. What separated Crockett's questioning from typical congressional theater was the depth and specificity of her preparation. As the hearing progressed, it became clear that she had access to internal documents, emails, and communications that provided unprecedented insight into the decision-making process behind family separation policies. Crockett began presenting specific case files that documented not just the implementation of family separation policies, but the decision-making process that led to their creation. These weren't general policy documents, these were specific communications between Miller and other administration officials that revealed the intentional nature of family separation as a deterrence strategy. The power of Crockett's approach became evident as she quoted directly from documents that Miller himself had authored or contributed to. This eliminated his ability to claim that family separation was an unintended consequence or a necessary evil. The documents showed that it was a deliberate policy choice designed to maximize deterrent effect. Miller's responses to this documentary evidence revealed his growing discomfort with the direction of the questioning. His earlier confidence had given way to careful, lawyerly responses that focused on technical details rather than the broader implications of his policies. He was clearly struggling to reconcile his public justifications for these policies with his private communications about their intended effects. What made Crockett's use of documents particularly effective was her presentation style. She didn't just wave papers around or make vague references to internal communications. She read specific quotes, cited specific dates, and provided specific context that made it impossible for Miller to dismiss or reinterpret the evidence. The methodical presentation of documentary evidence also served a broader purpose. It demonstrated that family separation wasn't a policy that had gotten out of hand or been misimplemented by lower-level officials. The documents showed that the harshest consequences of these policies were not just anticipated, they were intended. This revelation fundamentally changed the nature of the debate around family separation policies. Instead of being able to claim that negative consequences were unintended or that implementation had gone beyond what policymakers intended, Miller was confronted with evidence that the human cost of these policies was not just known but welcomed by their architects. The climax of Crockett's systematic demolition came when she revealed what political observers immediately recognized as a smoking gun: internal emails authored by Miller himself that explicitly described family separation as an intended consequence of immigration enforcement policies. These emails, which Crockett read aloud during the hearing, removed any remaining ambiguity about the intentional nature of family separation policies. Miller hadn't just implemented policies that happened to separate families. He had specifically designed policies with the goal of separating families as a deterrence mechanism. The impact of these revelations was immediate and devastating. Miller's entire defense had been built around the argument that family separation was an unfortunate but unintended consequence of necessary immigration enforcement. The emails proved that this defense was not just misleading, it was deliberately false. What made these emails particularly damaging was their tone and content. They revealed Miller not just as a policy implementer, but as someone who took satisfaction in the psychological impact of family separation on immigrant communities. The emails discussed family separation not as a regrettable necessity, but as a successful deterrence tool. For Crockett, the revelation of these emails represented the culmination of weeks of preparation and investigation. She had not just caught Miller in a contradiction or a misstatement. She had provided documentary proof that his entire public defense of these policies was based on deliberate deception. The immediate aftermath of this congressional hearing demonstrated the power of preparation, precision, and documented evidence in modern political discourse. Within hours, clips from the hearing were viral across social media platforms, and political commentators were describing it as one of the most effective congressional takedowns in modern American history. For Jasmine Crockett, the hearing represented a career-defining moment that transformed her from a first-term Congresswoman into a national political figure. Her methodical, evidence-based approach to holding powerful figures accountable resonated with Americans across the political spectrum who were frustrated with typical political theater and appreciated seeing substantive accountability in action. The hearing showcased a different model for political discourse, one based on preparation, evidence, and systematic presentation of facts rather than sound bites, personal attacks, or partisan rhetoric. Crockett's approach demonstrated that the most effective way to challenge controversial policies and powerful figures is through meticulous documentation and careful presentation of evidence. For Stephen Miller, the hearing represented a political catastrophe that severely damaged his prospects for future influence in Republican politics. His dismissive attitude, combined with the revelation of his intended consequence emails, created a narrative that extended far beyond immigration policy to questions about his character and judgment. The broader implications of this confrontation extend beyond the specific individuals involved. It demonstrated the continued importance of congressional oversight and the power of well-prepared legislators to hold former officials accountable for their policy decisions. It also showed how effective political communication in the modern era requires not just passion or rhetoric, but careful preparation and systematic presentation of evidence. Perhaps most importantly, this hearing demonstrated that political accountability is still possible in American democracy when legislators are willing to do the hard work of investigation, preparation, and systematic questioning. Crockett's success wasn't based on political theatrics or partisan attacks. It was based on the fundamental democratic principle that public officials should be held accountable for their actions through careful examination of evidence and systematic questioning about their decisions. The lasting legacy of this confrontation may be that it provides a model for how legislative oversight can function effectively in an era of political polarization. By focusing on documented evidence rather than partisan rhetoric, Crockett showed that it's possible to achieve meaningful accountability even in highly controversial policy areas. The hearing also demonstrated the continued importance of legal training and courtroom skills in political life. Crockett's background as a civil rights attorney provided her with the tools she needed to build a systematic case against Miller's policies and to present that case in a way that was both politically effective and substantively meaningful. As political observers continue to analyze this confrontation, it's clear that it represents something significant in American political discourse, a return to evidence-based accountability that transcends partisan politics and focuses on the fundamental question of whether public officials can be held responsible for the consequences of their policy decisions.